everybody. Reporting to you again from the Glamour City, Hollywood.
We're one of the few that I'm aware of that are pursuing full active safety certification, right? Functional safety certification for our neural nets, right? Because this is a new zone, right? And so we're going through that. We partnered with a company, Exceeda, on that so that we can get these functional safety. Because if you can't get something functional safety certified, it ain't going on a vehicle, right? It might go on a tractor here and there, but it will not go on a mass-produced automotive vehicle.
If you love listening to this show, please consider giving a rating and a review on Amazon Alexa or wherever you listen. We want to continue bringing you this amazing content, and part of our ability to do that means that we need a big audience. Now, it may not seem like much, but rating and reviewing the show will help more people find us, just like how you found this show. Simply on any podcast platform, search for a show, scroll down to the bottom, and push 5 stars. It's that easy. Thanks for supporting the show. Today, I'm joined by Barry Lunn, founder and CEO of Provizio. Welcome to the show today.
Thanks, Scott. Great to be here.
Your expertise is in radar and vision technologies, including founding Arralis, a radar company. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I've been in the high frequency electronics and radar business for 20 plus years, and I always say that plus is my own business. So yeah, been around the block in this, and as you can imagine, in that space, primarily in the aerospace and defense industry for most of that, right? And so Arralis, I found was the company previous to Provizio that I founded. And that was really, we set that up to try and bring millimeter wave high frequency electronics onto chip, right? Before that, it was all done in big lumpy blocks of metal and things like that. And I worked in that industry as well. So we were bringing it onto chip, saying that the world was going to move in this direction. And so we would have been very early on 4D radars and things like that, but mainly, as I say, for aerospace and defense type applications. But that's what brought me into the automotive industry then as well. Through that company, we started putting the first 4D radars on vehicles quite a few years ago with some of the cutting edge kind of autonomous groups and around solving edge cases. And then, long story short, I ended up selling that company, but that kind of need to solve that problem didn't go away. So that's what led to Provizio then eventually.
Fantastic. And again, I know you are very much steeped in this space. And certainly to your point, when we think about aerospace and defense, the kind of legacy products that were more mechanically based and fairly large, and if you needed to upgrade or make any changes, it required physical changes. But now we're talking about ICs and software defined. So it's very exciting. It really is. Now, I want to just take a step back and talk about a little bit about the LiDAR space, radar space, and just broadly more autonomous vehicle space. Now, we know that Luminar, which is a publicly traded stock, it's ranging in kind of the low dollar range. And many companies in just the broad AV space have really tumbled and taken a hit significantly. I wonder if you could give us a sweeping view of what's happening in the LiDAR space, radar space, and more broadly at the autonomous vehicle sector space.
Yeah, I think these are all symptoms, right? And to be fair, I'm glad you mentioned Luminar because that's what I'm comfortable talking about because it's not a penny stock yet, right? Whereas let's call it spade, an awful lot of the companies in the LiDAR space are, right? And they're almost coming off market right now. I think that where autonomous is right now, reality is the bubble burst, right? We didn't achieve what was meant to be achieved, and therefore everyone lost faith in the industry, and rightly so. I think markets punish you when you don't perform, right? And billions of dollars went into this space, right? And we didn't perform. Why? That's a longer one. I think radar and vision dominate automotive, right? And automotive manufacturers are really comfortable with radar and vision because they're low cost and they're robust, right? But when autonomy came along, you needed something higher resolution, and you needed obviously an active sensor that was high resolution. So LiDAR, obviously with the Google car and DARPA, etc., was seen as the problem solver. The problem was the costs and robustness, right? Two things that the automotive industry absolutely needs. Now, if you're going to have all these new business models and you're going to have all these shared ownerships and things like that, cost isn't as problematic, but guess what? The automotive industry, the guys are around a long time, and there's a good reason, right? Because they're able to maintain and keep their industry. So I think what's really happened is all that hype is just gone out of it, right? And LiDAR's biggest problem, and by the way, one of my partners in the company, Carl Jackson, like he's the inventor of the LiDAR SPAD, right? The solid state LiDAR SPAD. He's in pretty much every solid state LiDAR, his technology. He sold his company to onsemi. So it's not like we're here, putting down LiDAR, but LiDAR's problem was it didn't scale quickly enough. It didn't reduce costs quickly enough. And even with the guys like Illuminar, who have managed to get into production, right? And like a lot of work involved in what they've done. I know the guys are really, really smart guys. The problem now is the balance of system costs. And this is typical with new technologies. You spend so much time trying to solve the technical issue that you almost forget the balance of system cost until, again, in automotive, the balance. And when I say that, I'm talking about the cost to actually put the LiDAR into the vehicle. And because it has to sit and be seen, it's quite expensive. It has to be kept cool. It has all this other stuff. And we had this in the solar PV industry as well, where everyone was trying to get to the dollar per watt. And then it went, oh, hang on, where are we going to store everything? And the balance of system costs would kill the industry, right? I think that's essentially what's kind of happening with LiDAR. In the meantime, if you take radar's come from the other end, right? Radar wasn't good enough to deliver autonomous vehicles, right? It didn't have the resolution, okay? It's a really good ranging and velocity sensor, but it wasn't able to do the other bits. But what has happened in the meantime, and you mentioned it, the proliferation of getting millimeter wave onto silicon was a huge thing, right? Because that allowed you to do an awful lot of those traditional aero defense things, allowed you to do those in a digital format. And then you had GPUs and you had all this lovely fusion could happen, right? And suddenly now radars aren't so dumb looking anymore, right? Now radar point clouds, which used to be just blob at X, now they're intelligent. Now it's like, oh, there's a vehicle, there's a pedestrian, it's able to do that. And I think that intersection is kind of really getting, really impacting LiDAR, right? Because at the end of the day, you talk to any automator maker in the world, and I've been there, right? Where they've said, just give me a reason not to have to put a LiDAR on the vehicle, because it goes against everything they believe. They like low cost, they like robust, they don't like trouble. So they, a LiDAR, but it does show you how big the problem was, that they were prepared to look at and entertain and put a lot of money into a sensor type that goes against everything they believe. And the reason was you can't solve autonomy without high fidelity active sensing, right? So something's needed. Obviously, I'm a believer that imaging radar is the thing that's going to solve that.
There's a lot of, and I think you brought some excellent points. And certainly, if you look at Tesla, for example, they've been fairly resistant in utilizing LiDAR primarily because of cost reasons. And it's not just even the just integration of it, but to your point, it's a full integration and then the actual maintenance of it. And because these are sensitive mirrors, they're going to get miscalibrated over time. So there's just a host of issues. Now, my personal philosophy is that really for us to get to a point of autonomy with safety requires multimodal. So I don't think it's any particular approach that's going to trump everybody else, but requires the ability to drive down the cost of all the other modal capabilities, including LiDAR at some point. But again, for today's conversation, radar is very critical, especially when we talk about all weather conditions and things that LiDARs are going to be have some shortcomings around. Tell us about Provizio. How are you guys approaching this safety versus the autonomy?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things, I guess, I actually found when I started working in the autonomous vehicle industry, maybe it's coming from aero defense, but I didn't like the approach. It went totally against everything I'd always done, right? Like in the aerospace and defense industry, you prove how something works in the harshest condition, in the worst possible scenario. You do not turn up at NASA and say, I have a lovely technology. Now, it won't work in space, but it's really nice on the ground. And if you think about it, that was the autonomous vehicle industry. It was like, hey, it's really good at driving around in the sunshine in California, but hey, if it rains, it pulls over, right? That kind of approach seemed really foreign to me. So with Provizio, I was looking at, we actually have a here and now problem that's huge that needs to be solved, which is safety, right? And also, you know, I think the world has gotten a bit more serious about that, right? And recognizing that, and regulators are kind of going, hang on, we cannot let automakers away with maybe what we've let them away with. So we kind of took the approach of, with all this lovely technology, there's a here and now problem that we can solve. And start with the edge cases. Actually start with the bit that the autonomous vehicle industry left till last. So let's start with southwest of Ireland, where I live, you know, in the heavy rain, being able to, you know, detect and vehicles at a reasonable distance. And then once you solve those hard problems, the other bit becomes the automating the vehicle becomes the easy bit. I also think it will help, and this was just my thought process around how we sell it to people, right? People had a visceral reaction to autonomy, and rightly so. You tell them you're going to take away, you know, oh no, the machine's going to do it. And we've all seen some of the examples, right, of when the machine's in charge. So that wasn't a really clever way to go about it from a marketing perspective. So my approach was, hey, how about we sit in the vehicle? How about we get people comfortable with our technologies, and slowly but surely, as we can prove we're better than a human in this scenario, we start to take over the driver function. So that was really the approach. So we then designed our system from the ground up with that in mind, right? So let's start with the worst scenarios. Let's start with what we actually have to separate. You know, you can do some really nice things with sensors and go, hey, look at this beautiful building and all of that. None of that solves the driving problem, right? So we just started looking at the problems, you know, tires on the road, you know, pedestrians walking beside metal, you know, in an overpass. All these kind of awkward scenarios. We started building from the ground up, and then looking at how could we do as much of this as possible in software. Because the beauty about doing things in software, and obviously GPUs coming on stream, is I can now run, if you can run your sensor software in the same place that you run your neural nets, that gives you an awful lot of power, because now, as you mentioned, the other modalities that come in, now I can take in that camera data where the radar is weak, and I can learn from that camera data. I can bring in LiDAR data if it exists. So that was really our approach. Let's have a GPU-based backend. Let's move all our digital signal processing and sensor so into that. Have as little as possible in hardware, but if we do have it in hardware, let's have it in programmable ICs. And then that was really the genesis of Provizio. And by the way, when I said that at first, in 2018, 2019, when I started talking to the OEMs, I knew they kind of said that's a bit dumb, right? We don't believe what you're saying, right? The only people who kind of were going that route was Tesla, who you mentioned, right? That world has completely changed. No one tells us we're dumb anymore. It took us about 2.5 years just purely to overcome all the technical milestones associated with trying, as you can imagine, to do all of that. To move essentially what I've been doing for 20 years from hardware into software. But nobody can argue with the evidence. And I think that's the autonomous industry has to prove as well. Prove you're better. And I'll give you an example. Right now, we're testing just down the road from me here in Shannon, right? We get a lot of fog, right? Mm-hmm. In that fog, our vision sensor can see about 20 meters, right? The cameras on the vehicle can see about 20 meters. The human can see about the same, right? About 20 meters. Our radar can see 600 meters, right? So very quickly, if you deploy that in a vehicle, nothing to do with autonomy, but in that scenario, who should be making the decision? The sensor that can see 600 meters in front of the vehicle, can see if there's an issue that it needs to address, or the human who can see 20 meters. It becomes really obvious. And I think that's how we unpeel this onion and we actually solve the autonomy issue. Let's make it unethical to let someone drive. I think that's the only way we can solve autonomy.
Yeah, I really appreciate the example of the fog, because I think there's enough studies that show that when you have fog, you're going to have some significant collision pileup, really. And it's because we don't have enough depth perception. So radar really starts to address that longer range that we can't see and the other system can't see. So that's very exciting. The other thing that I wanted to get into a little bit and you start to talk about it is maybe you could go a little bit one level down. There's MISO, which is your software-defined antenna, active antenna technique that sits on top of the ICs, the integrated circuit. And if you could talk about how in that approach really allows for you guys to be able to do this instantaneous beam switching, right? Being able to have transmit different channels based on what's needed for that resolution. And then as we have time, if you could go into, I believe it's called SPTDMA, which is your signal processing, which is absolutely critical. So much
Yeah,
noise, right?
and the two are needed to work together, right?
Absolutely.
And that's the key part of the whole thing. Yeah, and I guess one of the benefits of being in the industry this long, we've probably built every kind of radar, right? Over time, right? So we've built field array apertures, we built sparse arrays, we built beam steering, we built every kind of radar. So when we were looking at this, there was a couple of things that informed. One thing that was uniform over all those years working in aero defense was we built low noise radars, right? And noise is the enemy when it comes to radar, right? That's where all of the extra dots that you don't want to see there. And that's why LiDAR is so linear, it's beautiful, right? So we needed to build something like that. So the first thing we had to think about is if you bring in lots and lots of more channels, radar, physical radar channels, you actually introduce noise with every single one of those. The fact that we've now moved on to silicon is an awful lot more noisy than we'll say the traditional like gallium arsenide and things like that, right? So you have to accept that, right, this is it. So we started looking at what would an antenna look like if you were to start from scratch and look at this. So what we do first, on our receive pad, we built our own low noise amplifiers. So they sit in the active antenna layer in front of the radar chip. And what they do is they lower the noise floor, right? And that's significant because if you can lower the noise floor, you can now use more channels, right? So that allows us to divide up that signal more. So that's on the we'll say the receive pad. On the transmit pad, that's where we bring in the instantaneous switching. So we developed, again, our own ICs, and that sits, again, in front of the radar channel. So the biggest cost in a radar is physical radar channels. But it's not just cost, it's introducing noise as well. So if I can have the same number of channels without having silicon physical radar channel, then, and I can do it instantaneously, there can't be a time loss, right? So I've done traditional beam steering where like tack, 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 tack through the array. That's no good in automotive, right? Because that means you're going to miss something while you're going through that. So like we're talking like, milliseconds, right? That we've got to be able to go through the full array. So that's what we did. And again, it's an IC we developed ourselves in-house. That sits on the transmit side. And then what we're doing is essentially switching and opening up our transmitters over, a range. And what controls that? You mentioned that the DSP technique that we call SPTDMA, right? And that's a new form of multiplexing, right? That's basically using a combination of those two sides of the antenna so that we essentially get more resolution out of every channel. So it basically, when it's rolled out about like across 4 chips, say, which is kind of a standard imaging radar, we're able to get 30 times more resolution out of that radar using this active antenna technique without having to dilute like the problem. And we use obviously sparse arrays, but we use it under the restriction of the low noise amplifier. Because you can go too sparse, right? And there's companies out there saying, hey, we're going to have, multiple radar heads. And obviously you can do that. But, if you're going to put your sparse array across that's beautiful for doing imagery of space. That is never going to get active safety certified for automotive. I don't care what anyone says, because there's too much, it's too prone to error. It's too much, you will get false alerts, you will get issues, and then that's the death of it. So that's really where it came from. Because it's new, we were able to patent it, which is really nice. We've got the MIMSO technique patented. We've got the SPTDMA multiplexing patented. And that's kind of the base layer. And that's before you apply any of the machine learning or AI or any of that. Because if you don't have a really good foundation in radar, right, everything else is kind of building on flimsy data, if that makes sense.
Absolutely does. And I appreciate the fact that you explained it in a very eloquent way around this efficiency and really maximizing the full utilization of it. Now, let's layer on some of the signal processing algorithms and the convolutional neural networks. And the reason that's important is not only because you guys are able to respond, you start to allude to it, not just in like 3 milliseconds, but sub 5 millisecond, which is significant. So talk about that. And also, what's the competition requirement, but also the energy requirement that's needed. And is there a lot of round robin back to the cloud, or is it mostly edge analytics here?
Yeah, absolutely. No, really good question. And of course, you know the answer because it depends, right? Because it depends what you're doing and where. But we try to do everything super lightweight. So especially anything around the multiplexing or anything like that, we do that at the DSP level, right? So it can be done so for example, it can be done on an embedded SoC, right? So within the radar chip. And I think that's really important. You've got to be able to do the basics of producing your radar cube super lightweight, right? If producing your radar cube requires monstrous GPU, like everyone's fighting for that same GPU, and it's also power, right? So we try to keep everything super lightweight. So we do everything at a DSP level, and then we augment it with neural nets and things like that at the GPU level. Because by the way, some automakers haven't bought in to GPUs, right? Everyone's got a slightly different opinion. You mentioned as well, where do we do it and where does it happen? That's the choice of the automaker as well. Like everything we do it stands on its own 2 feet. It's all modular, right? So if you just want radar cube out, you can have that. If you want, object detections out and range and velocity, you can have that. If you want to process at the edge, or if you want to bring multiple radars together and process them in a centralized GPU, it will work like that. All the techniques we've done will work separately in each zone. So at a very base level, our technology, and especially MIMSO and SBTD will just work on the embedded SoC, right? Super lightweight, super easygoing. But we also do, look, we're partnered with NVIDIA. We're doing a ton of really cool work with them. But again, trying to be super lightweight and also being very modular, because we're one of the few that I'm aware of that are pursuing full active safety certification, right? Functional safety certification for our neural nets, right? Because this is a new zone, right? And so we're going through that. We partnered with a company, Exida, on that, so that we can get these functional safety. Because if you can't get something functional safety certified, it ain't going on a vehicle, right? It might go on a tractor here and there, but it will not go on a mass-produced automotive vehicle. So that's a kind of boring bit that you have to solve. And to get through that makes you modular, that makes you lightweight. And I think we have all these very lightweight, but we're really mean to our AI team, I would say, right? Everything has to run on the lightest weight possible because, okay, you take a Jaguar Land Rover or you take a Mercedes, right? Who's going to ship an NVIDIA ORN on every vehicle, right? That's all fine, and you can say there's loads of GPU resource there, but you bring 8 cameras back to that centralized GPU resource, and let's see how much is left for the radar, right? And like the camera, no matter what way you look at it, is the top dog right now,
Absolutely.
right? When it comes to autonomy, so we have to behave ourselves and act within that, and so I would say super lightweight. Everything we do, even our we would say our research instruments that we sell right now that you can put out, they've got a built-in NVIDIA Jetson, right? Just built in there. So pretty much the lightest weight GPU you could run. And they are running full DSPs and point clouds, and as well as perception right there in the edge. So again, in terms of the cloud, I see the cloud as a training network. We do not do anything safety critical in the cloud. To me, it makes no sense. I don't know
Of
any
course.
automaker either that's seen that, but it's a great place to bring all that data back, train it up, learn from what you've seen, and then deploy it back out to the edge.
Absolutely agree with that. Now, everything we talked about, you guys have productized it or bundled it under Visio Prime 6K, and I think you have some other products as well. How is Visio Prime 6K doing in the marketplace? What's the receptivity? And what are the key selling points that, again, feels like the OEMs and others are resonating with?
Yeah. So actually, what we just mentioned when it comes to OEMs, the bit that resonates most I'm seeing with OEMs right now is the combination of low cost and software definable and over-the-air updates, right? Because those two things point to new revenue streams to OEMs, and they are, as you're probably aware, they are very hungry for new revenue streams, especially ones that it's proven that customers will pay for, right? And they will not pay to have heated seats, right? As a over-the-air update, but they will pay for ADAS functions, right? I mean, one thing Tesla have done is proven people will pay a lot of money for ADAS, right? And especially if they think it's going to make their lives a bit easier. So the OEMs really like that. What they don't like is eating the cost of it up front, right? And I think that's why Tesla is a really good benchmark. Because why have Tesla really resisted LiDAR? I mean, if their customers were prepared to pay for it, why not just throw it on? Tesla ship platforms. It has everything already baked in. So if you're not going to pay the extra, they've got to eat the cost of the hardware day one, right? So
Absolutely.
our hardware, you define, 6K, right? 6K, our Prime 6K, which is our forward-facing radar, right? And it's a reference design for OEMs to see. That's really the one that proves you possibly don't need LiDAR. I don't care if there's LiDAR on there, I'm really happy. It trains my neural nets, everything's really good, right? But that one is able to detect small objects at range, right? And that I think is critical to showing that there is a path here where you don't, and it's $100 in series production, right? So that's a completely, and there's no balance of system costs. The balance of system costs is a screw, right? So that's what's nice about 6K. It gives them that path. But how we define our business model is, and what I think resonates is, well, we see ourselves more as a tier 1.5, right? So we make all our tools, all our development tools available to either tier ones or OEMs or whoever else, the platform makers, right? Who are really important here, the NVIDIAs, Qualcomms, Mobileye's, right? We make our tools available. So if you're an OEM or a tier one, like let's say you're Tesla, you just want to use MIMSO, right? You just want to use that thing. You can just license that, put it on all your radars, and it becomes your radar, and you go build that. But if you want if you want to go a little bit further and you want a radar, you want to go a little bit further and you want some of the perception stack from us, if we're adding value in each of those, you can move up along that. And that's what we're seeing. That's what's resonating, rather than no OEM out there likes being told, hey, this is the way you should be doing it, not the way you've been doing it for the last 100 years, which is kind of really difficult. That's what LiDAR guys try to do. That's really hard, right? Change the whole business model. We don't do that. We just sit in nicely. We try not to offend anyone.
And I think you make an excellent point. I think that notion of choice and almost like a cafeteria plan that you can move up or down is important for not just controlling costs, but also I think a lot of these OEMs and tiers want to assert design, engineering, and IP control as well. Speaking of, there's been a recent strategic partnership with Mergun, which is a global tier one, tier two. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so Mergon are an awesome company. They're pretty much in every production vehicle in the world. They're like 68% of EVs made in the world are Mergon all over them, right? So they're really established tier one. How we're working together is actually on all the other stuff. So automotive series production, it tends to be with the traditional tier ones, right? That are in the radar space that we're licensing our tools to, and that will be revealed in time. But there's a huge market out there in terms of agriculture, mining, smart cities, et cetera, et cetera. And really, that's what that initial Mergon partnership is around, servicing those markets. So we've got the Visio R&I product that we call it. That's got the embedded GPU and everything in there. And that's a plug and play solution that gives you, classification, and so a mining company can buy it tomorrow and get odometry underground, right? And an agricultural company can go and actually, plug and play radar, which yourself isn't very common, right? Normally, radar comes with 20 engineers and a bunch of calibration equipment. So that's what that's about. So we've signed a partnership. We've been working with the guys for quite some time. Our first production units start rolling off the line in June, and it's to service those markets. And to kind of put it in perspective, John Deere ships more units than most automotive OEMs
Yep.
in the world, right?
Absolutely.
big markets. So it's the likes of the agricultural companies and the mining that initial one is about.
And again, I think it's a smart strategy, and we've known this for more than 5+ years, is that those segments that you're talking about, mining, agriculture, for example, and others that are more off the road, right, doesn't have the same level of highway safety issues and all these concerns that we're seeing with the likes of Waymo. So I think it's a much faster to market, much faster way to generate revenue. So my final question is, what's happening with your company in the context of what we talked about at the beginning, given the fact that it's a tough market out there? So can you talk about a little bit about, at a high level, kind of the sales pipeline and how those are converting into real opportunities where you can actually realize revenue?
Yeah, so we it was lovely up till not so long ago that we were pre-revenue deep tech company, and you can be right about everything, right? And now we're not, right? Now we're selling, we're into a bunch of the top tier ones and the top OEMs across agri mining, but also automotive are using the tech and testing it and coming back and telling us what they think and what they don't think. So that's where we are as an org. I think our timing, this is luck, right? I'm not going to be that entrepreneur that tells you I timed everything perfectly here, Scott, right? Like luck is we're coming into this, I see, at the right time, right? Like as in we're starting to ramp up a technology that's lower cost, that solves the problem, while an awful lot of our competitors are getting wiped out because they were too high cost, and and sometimes you just run out of road, right? Like sometimes it's not, technology just came a bit early and then you run out of road. So that's kind of where we're at in that we're well funded. We've been lucky. We've had good like angels in from the beginning. I've been lucky that obviously I've had some good success in the past, which helps obviously attract money. But we've had good angels who kind of doubled down, right? So when the world all went to pot, we just quietly went out and doubled our funding, right? Which allowed us to stay the course. And now we have these units coming into production. And one thing, I'm old fashioned, right? I see myself as a sales guy deep down. I believe if you sell something, you should make money on it, right? And I think that's a mistake an awful lot of the sensor type companies did, is they're losing money on every sensor. We've made money on the very first sensor, and we'll make it on the last sensor. So we make money. So every time I sell a unit, we're making money. So now that we're going into production with Mergon, we'll make more money, right? Because it's into production. So that's that keeps us sensible, right? We can build a proper, real business in that regard. But then we got a ton of really nice partnerships coming together with some of the platforms, some of the tier twos, so that we're ready to ramp up when the OEMs are ready to go. And look, the market, right? OEMs are struggling a little bit. Tier ones are really struggling, right? They're shedding jobs, money. That's, again, I would say good for us in the long term, right? Because if they don't have that money to invest in R&D, they don't have the team to keep doing that, well, then partnering up with companies like us becomes, a lot more attractive, right? And basically, they haven't stopped their R&D track. They just partner with us and continue to accelerate. So for us, look, I think it's worked out well. It's a good time. We're seeing the markets are opening back up from an investment point of view as well. So we will take on money this year. Once the terms are right. And I think we don't need to, which is usually a good time to go raising. Also, the fact that we've got revenues now coming in. So I'm feeling pretty bullish, right? Like, they all say it can't be done, this and that, right? But Mobileye exists, right? Mobileye was that startup. Mobileye have done Envision. We'll be pretty happy if we can do that in radar. So yeah, next Mobileye, if that's where we end up, I'll be okay with that, Scott.
All right. So on that note, I have been joined by Barry Lunn, founder and CEO of Provizio.
Thank you, Scott.
If you've enjoyed this episode, take a moment to rate our show on any podcast platform that you listen to. Scroll down to the bottom and push 5 stars. It's that easy. And as always, thanks for listening.